We're taking the fight directly to the sinister criminal cartels, and we're showing them no mercy. We are...
At 2:47 a.m., deep in the eastern Pacific, radar screens lit up with a strange formation nearly 70 nautical miles offshore, far beyond any commercial route. A cartel fleet, armed like a navy, was moving under the cover of clouds, escorted by pirate gunboats and carrying billions in cocaine aboard a disguised long-haul trawler. This wasn't smuggling. It was military-style maneuvering by a transnational criminal alliance. The fleet thought it was untouchable until the U.S. Navy, Coast Guard, and SEALS locked on. Subscribe to Military Power now, because what comes next is a blueprint for how America wins real wars at sea. They didn't just run drugs, they designed a fleet. The criminal fleet, valued at $2 billion, was not a random smuggling attempt. It was structured like a naval force, with command, shielding, and transport elements working together in a layered formation. At the lead was a modified pirate command vessel, built for intimidation and protection. It was reinforced with steel panels, equipped with multiple heavy machine guns, and carried radar jamming equipment, strong enough to confuse even modern maritime tracking systems. Behind it were 3 go-fast boats capable of reaching speeds above 55 knots. These boats were agile, dangerous, and operated in tight formation, weaving like a school of fish to dodge radar. They were not carrying cargo. They were the fleet's defensive shield. At the rear was the crown jewel, a long-range fishing vessel, repainted, renamed, and rigged for deception. Outwardly, it passed as a legal trawler, the kind seen floating in international waters every day. But its underdeck compartments were filled with hundreds of sealed cocaine bales, tightly packed to keep the center of gravity low and stable. The estimated black market value was staggering. In a single night, this fleet could deliver more than $2 billion worth of narcotics to the Pacific coastline. That wasn't a shipment. It was a declaration. This wasn't the work of amateurs. It was a precise partnership between a well-funded Latin American cartel and a rogue pirate syndicate operating deep in unregulated waters. The cartel provided the product, the cash, and the global trafficking network. The pirates brought their hardened sailors, vessels stripped of registration, and navigation routes designed to stay off every public shipping map. Together, they created a floating supply chain that answered to no one and could evade even the best maritime patrols. This kind of alliance hadn't been seen before. In the past, cartel shipments typically relied on low-tech routes, including fast boats, tunnel drops, and handoffs along the coast. But this was different. This was a cartel acting like a paramilitary force, extending its power into naval territory. They were evolving, testing how far offshore they could operate and still deliver bulk cargo under protection. The command ship wasn't just there for firepower, it was a signal. They were ready to fight if intercepted. What made this operation especially dangerous wasn't just the drugs, it was the discipline. Each vessel followed a strict pattern. The transport trailed behind, never breaking formation. And the entire fleet moved during a carefully calculated moon phase, taking advantage of high swell and overcast skies to remain nearly invisible. This new model posed a problem. Traditional law enforcement was unable to keep up. The U.S. Coast Guard wasn't built to chase down military-style formations in international waters alone. And without actionable intelligence, even Navy patrols could miss the threat. But this time, the plan didn't stay hidden. Inside a federal signals analysis center, a junior analyst flagged an encrypted signal burst. The packets were out of place, far from any registered merchant route and carrying terms like Window 03, payload, and escort. Within hours, the information reached the FBI's special units. The presence of command terms suggested a sense of organization. It wasn't random traffic chatter, it was pre-operation coordination. Soon after, confirmation arrived from a high-level informant embedded in cartel operations. The fleet was real. The alliance was active, and if no one moved fast, it would disappear again. This was the moment the FBI made the call. Realizing the scale of the threat, the Bureau opened encrypted communication lines with the Department of the Navy and the Coast Guard's Eastern Pacific Command. What followed was the activation of a classified joint strike initiative known as Operation Trident Storm. The goal wasn't just to intercept a drug route, it was to dismantle a new model before it could be replicated. With intelligence in hand, the Navy dispatched a guided missile destroyer equipped with advanced radar arrays capable of penetrating cloud cover and tracking dozens of fast-moving objects. The Coast Guard positioned one of its top-speed cutters along the projected escape route of the go-fast boats. 2 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters were deployed, one to deliver a SEAL boarding team and the other to maintain visual contact and support targeting from the air. Above it all, a P-8 Poseidon aircraft began its wide-loop surveillance run. Its multi-mode radar was designed for submarine detection, but its high-resolution surface tracking made it ideal for spotting small boats hiding among swells and fog. The Poseidon linked every asset in the field, sending real-time telemetry, radar signatures, and encrypted updates directly to the warship and cutter. The ocean, however, did not make things easy. Waves rose in long, rolling breakers that rocked even the larger ships. Winds gusted across the surface, flattening whitecaps into streaks that looked almost identical to fast-moving boats on radar. Visibility was minimal. Moonlight was blocked out entirely. If there was ever a night to move illegal cargo unseen, this was it. But the American task force had already adapted. It wasn't about waiting in one spot. It was about painting a grid, feeding updates into one unified picture, and forcing the cartel fleet to reveal itself. And soon, it did. Please share your thoughts on the alliance between organized crime and high seas piracy. Could this become the new standard in maritime trafficking? What happened next forced every American asset to go on a weapons alert. It started with silence. When the Coast Guard transmitted the first radio warning, the cartel fleet said nothing. Not a click. Not a flare. Not a course adjustment. The message echoed across encrypted channels, but there was no response. A second broadcast was sent minutes later, more direct, more urgent. This time, radar screens lit up. Vessels within the smuggling fleet began to shift formation. The criminal convoy was not planning to surrender. They were planning to split and run. The moment the cartel realized they had been exposed, the fleet snapped into a coordinated split. The command ship, largest and most heavily armed, turned abruptly to port. Its new heading pointed straight at the Navy destroyer. This wasn't a retreat. It was an attempt to buy time. The command vessel accelerated, taking an aggressive stance. Its radar jammers activated at full strength, spraying distortion across the frequency band. Flares launched from the stern, creating clouds of interference. The ship's crew operated heavy weapons and locked their positions along the outer deck. Meanwhile, the rest of the fleet broke away in the opposite direction. 3 go-fast boats throttled up, slicing across the waves at top speed. They surrounded the disguised transport ship, shielding it from line of sight. The go-fast boats weaved in coordinated patterns, creating false trails in the radar signature. It was a maneuver designed to confuse tracking systems. The cocaine vessel stayed at the center of this escort, its engines pushing hard as it fled northwest, deeper into rough waters. From above, the fleet now looked like 2 separate attacks. One was coming head-on. The other was fleeing. But both were part of the same plan. The U.S. Navy destroyer took the brunt of the command ship's challenge. It held position at first, then shifted to intercept. Battle crews locked into their stations. The ship's systems moved into combat readiness, with targeting software identifying the incoming threat. The command ship was closing the distance quickly, using electronic noise and light clutter to mask its actual speed. But the destroyer's radar worked beyond visual limits. Its array locked onto the shape hidden behind the static. Naval operators fed the tracking data to fire control, painting the lead vessel with calculated precision. Orders were clear: no first strike, hold unless fired upon, and then the shots came. From the command ship's forward deck, red tracer rounds exploded into the sky. Machine gun bursts zipped across the surface, not aimed directly at the destroyer, not yet, but close enough to force a response. Warning shots? Maybe. But in military terms, they had just escalated. The Navy answered. The destroyer launched flares first, lighting the water in a ring of white fire. Then its own guns fired warning blasts, sending shockwaves that towered up from the sea. The message was clear. If the Cartel warship came any closer, it would not survive. Behind the destroyer, the Coast Guard cutter was already in motion. Its job was not to engage the command vessel. It had a separate mission: chase down the fleeing transport and the go-fast boats protecting it. Despite rough waves and unstable conditions, the cutter kept pace. Every swell lifted its bow, then dropped it hard against the surface. However, the crew pushed on, constantly watching the radar. The go-fast boats moved like shadows, shifting every few seconds, throwing off sensors with sudden stops and erratic angles. The P-8 Poseidon remained the backbone of the battlefield. Flying high above the entire zone, its operators filtered through radar clutter and noise. They identified the actual positions of every enemy craft and updated the positions of the Allied units accordingly. Each twitch of the command ship, each change in speed by the go-fast boats was logged, transmitted, and shared across the fleet. The entire conflict space was now wired into a synchronized loop. On the cutter's deck, smaller pursuit boats were launched. Crews jumped in and took off after the go-fast targets, bouncing across sharp waves and maintaining visual contact. These pursuit boats had been designed for precisely this type of scenario: fast, light, and able to hold steady even when the ocean refused to cooperate. But the chase was far from over. In the air, the second MH-60 helicopter hovered into position. It was armed with a precision rifle operator, a trained marksman with high-powered optics, and a direct line to Poseidon's data feed. His target was not the go-fast boats. It was the cocaine transport ship. The vessel had been running under the protection of the go-fast, but now it was breaking into open water. That made it vulnerable. The marksman steadied his breath and sighted the rear propulsion systems. On his signal, the rifle bucked once. A clean hit struck the port outboard motor. A second shot followed seconds later, turning off the starboard engine. With both central propulsion systems destroyed, the transport ship slowed rapidly. Its hull twisted in the current, unable to maintain a straight course. Within minutes, it stopped entirely. Smoke hissed from the damaged engine compartments, but the vessel remained intact. This was intentional. The plan was never to sink the ship. It was to stop it and secure the evidence. With the transport dead in the water, Coast Guard boarding teams shifted course. The smaller pursuit boats peeled away from the go-fast chase and circled the drifting ship. They climbed aboard quickly, weapons raised, but the crew offered no fight. Instead, they dropped to the deck, hands raised. The message had been received. There were no shots fired here, only silence and steel. The decision to turn off the engines instead of destroying the entire vessel was a strategic one. It preserved the whole cargo. Inside the storage compartments, agents would later uncover nearly $2 billion worth of cocaine. The intact vessel also allowed interrogation of the captured crew, who held critical information about routes, contacts, and coordination methods. And perhaps, just as important, it avoided the political backlash of sinking a ship without a legal process. The Navy and Coast Guard knew that sinking vessels could trigger diplomatic challenges. In recent operations, the destruction of drug boats had raised concerns in regional forums. This time, by disabling instead of destroying, they retained control of both the cargo and the narrative. As the captured transport drifted under guard, the battle was not yet over. The go-fast boats were still on the run, and the command ship had not surrendered. But the tide had clearly shifted. The cartel's strategy of splitting the fleet had bought them time. It had forced American forces to divide their attention, but it had not given them escape. Now the hunter's net was tightening. The next phase would come fast. It would begin with the final push against the command vessel, still defiant in the darkness. What happened aboard that ship would decide the fate of the entire criminal fleet, seeing it high before dropping it with force. But the chase could not stop. The go-fast boats ahead were built for speed, but not for endurance. They darted in and out of radar coverage, trying to lose the Coast Guard in the folds of the sea. The cutter maintained full throttle, its engines roaring as the crew constantly adjusted to the unpredictable ocean. The risk of collision was high, but falling back was not an option. From the rear launch bay, 2 26-foot pursuit boats were released into the water. Their crews jumped aboard with practiced speed, already tracking the closest go-fast boat with handheld thermal scopes. Engines fired instantly. The boats shot forward, bouncing from wave to wave as they surged into the chaotic sea. Their goal was simple: close the distance, flank the target, and force a surrender. Up ahead, the go-fast boats separated. One veered left, another cut right. The third stayed locked in escort formation near the drifting cocaine transport. Each moved with aggression, turning sharply and throwing up high sprays of water to obscure their path. From the air, it appeared to be a scene of confusion. But for the cartel pilots, this was rehearsed chaos. The cutter's bridge team quickly recalibrated. One pursuit boat was sent left, another right, and the cutter itself barreled straight at the center group. This three-way split formed a loose net designed to trap the remaining cartel boats regardless of direction. The Poseidon aircraft above maintained watch, feeding real-time corrections to the teams below. The go-fasts might be fast, but they were no longer invisible. The pursuit tightened. One go-fast slowed slightly, forced to adjust for a braking swell. That was all the opportunity needed. The closest Coast Guard team surged forward and came up on its port side. The boarding crew rose to standing positions, weapons drawn, shouting clear commands. The cartel crew hesitated, then raised their arms in surrender. The boat was secured within seconds. Another pursuit boat, following the second go-fast that had turned hard east, matched the vessel's angles. For several tense minutes, the boats raced almost side by side, jumping waves and diving into dips. Finally, the Coast Guard boat used its hull to nudge the go-fast off its line. With the radar clearly showing its limited range, the cartel pilot gave up. His hands left the wheel. The second boat was secured. The final go-fast was the most determined. It had remained close to the now disabled transport vessel, trying to pull away at an angle just wide enough to escape radar lock. But the cutter itself was closing in. When the larger ship came within firing range, it unleashed a barrage of flares, creating a perimeter of heat and light. The go-fast turned sharply, but the path was blocked. Seconds later, it too was surrounded. All three cartel boats were now either stopped or drifting under escort. The boarding process moved quickly. Coast Guard teams moved from boat to boat, securing weapons and ordering the crews to lie flat on the deck. Zip cuffs clicked in rhythm. Each crew member was separated, cataloged, and photographed. They were then transferred to holding areas aboard the cutter and destroyer, where federal agents would begin interviews and classification. Back aboard the transport vessel, now under complete control, the real inspection began. A team of special agents boarded with portable scanners, tracking equipment, and drug detection canines. They descended into the storage deck first. The heat and chemical odor immediately confirmed their suspicions. Wrapped in multiple layers of plastic, soaked in masking agents, and packed in reinforced crates, the cocaine bales filled almost every available space below deck. When the count ended, the tally exceeded all estimates. The shipment was worth more than $2 billion on the black market. It represented not just money, but months of production, logistics, and violent control over the supply chain. Losing it would cost the cartel far more than it would gain in profit. It would damage the reputation. But that was only the beginning. Deeper in the ship's electronic systems, agents discovered encrypted GPS units, hardened satellite phones, and sealed notebooks. Inside the notebooks were coded symbols, maritime coordinates, and timetables. The digital equipment was immediately handed to onboard FBI analysts. What they found changed the scope of the mission. The GPS devices did not just contain the route of this fleet. They showed multiple courses, pre-programmed and segmented. 3 additional routes had been outlined, each stretching from the same Pacific launch points toward different coastal zones along Central America and Mexico. Each route had its own staging areas, marked with labels indicating supply points, crew swaps, or navigation resets. This was not a single operation. It was a tested network. Agents identified offshore rock formations, hidden inlets, and GPS-timed rendezvous points that lined up with recent intelligence reports. It confirmed the worst-case theory. The cartel had developed an offshore pipeline, managed with military precision, and covered by layers of digital secrecy. They were no longer smuggling by opportunity. They were operating a fleet. Each cartel member aboard the transport ship was now under federal custody. Their backgrounds were being run through biometric databases. Their tattoos, accents, and word choices were already providing hints about gang affiliation, training history, and rank. The connections between cartel and pirate crews would now be mapped, cross-referenced, and compared against international smuggling patterns. As the last go-fast boat was towed into position beside the cutter, and the boarded crews were marched into containment, it became clear that no vessel had escaped. The command ship had been boarded and seized. The transport ship had been disabled and inspected. All go-fast boats were captured. There were no runners left at sea. This was not just a win. It was a total sweep. The Poseidon plane continued its circuit overhead, scanning for heat signatures or lingering vessels. It found nothing. The ocean had returned to a restless calm. The final step was to log and transmit the seized data. FBI technicians began uploading digital copies of every recovered map, codebook, and device. The live feed from the operation was already being archived for analysis and prosecution. Satellite images of the chase were sent to federal headquarters. In a secure briefing room hundreds of miles away, red pins began to appear on a digital map. One by one, they lit up the coastline. Each pin marked a hidden supply route, a possible launch site, or a cartel-controlled checkpoint. The operation had ended, but the real investigation was only beginning. The data confirmed what law enforcement had suspected. This was not an isolated attempt. It was part of a much larger system. A system designed to operate beyond national borders, beyond coastal jurisdiction, and beyond radar reach. The criminal fleet that had once thought it could outrun American power had been broken, but its design had been exposed. The model was now visible. That made it vulnerable. The next step was clear. Dismantle the entire structure, not just at sea, but on land, in ports, and inside the financial channels that kept it alive. But before that next mission could begin, there was one last task. Aboard the destroyer, the commander stepped onto the bridge and looked at the radar scope. Nothing but returning friendlies. He keyed the mic and issued a short order. Prepare to tow the captured transport and send the message to Washington. It is done. The next phase would begin with what was hidden inside those encrypted notebooks. The alliance between a powerful cartel and offshore pirates gave birth to a $2 billion criminal fleet, complete with a command ship, go-fast escorts, and a disguised cocaine transport vessel. It was the FBI that first detected the encrypted signals, sparking a rapid joint deployment by the Navy, Coast Guard, and SEAL teams despite dangerous sea conditions. When the pirates split formation, U.S. forces engaged on 2 fronts. SEALs fast-roped onto the command vessel. A helicopter marksman disabled the cocaine ship's engines, and Coast Guard teams captured all remaining go-fast boats. The operation led to the recovery of over $2 billion in narcotics and critical encrypted maps, revealing a larger smuggling network still unfolding. The entire fleet was captured intact. Strategically, this mission proved that American forces can dismantle a fully armed criminal navy. It also laid the groundwork for future operations using advanced surveillance aircraft, sea drones, and upgraded coastal patrols. The message is now clear. Any cartel that moves at sea will be tracked. Any hour, any ocean. Subscribe to Military Power and tell us in the comments, what should America do next to stay ahead of maritime threats?